Lies, money, and a rapper with a target on his back. These are some of the themes of the defense's closing argument in the Sean Combs criminal case. The prosecution delivered their fiery closing argument in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal trial.
Savage! I'm a savage! Oh! I'm a savage!
What happens when power, fame, and extreme allegations collide? Sean Diddy Combs just faced the fight of his life in court, and his defense team didn't hold back. With everything on the line, they stepped into that courtroom and flipped the entire narrative on its head. Instead of denying the chaos, they leaned into it, arguing that what the world sees as criminal was nothing more than a private lifestyle choice. They claimed this case wasn't about law-breaking, it was about judgment. And according to them, the prosecution twisted consensual relationships into something far darker. But was it all just a slick performance? Or did they actually dismantle the charges, piece by piece? The jury is still out. But what happened in that courtroom has everyone talking, and what the defense revealed might just change how this entire case is remembered. Sean Diddy Combs walked into court facing some of the most serious accusations of his life: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transporting women across state lines for illicit purposes. These aren't just tabloid headlines, these are federal charges that carry decades behind bars. And with every news cycle, the public pressure and speculation only intensified. The prosecution painted a grim picture: a powerful music mogul using his influence, money, and network to build a criminal enterprise operating in plain sight. According to them, Diddy wasn't just throwing parties, he was orchestrating a system of exploitation behind closed doors. Bodyguards, assistants, and insiders were allegedly all part of the machine. But when it came time for the defense to speak, they didn't just deny the claims, they ripped the entire case apart from the foundation. With bold statements and even bolder tactics, they made it clear they were not here to apologize, they were here to expose what they believed was a twisted story built more on outrage than on evidence. And their first move? Shocking the courtroom with a very different version of the truth. From the very first words out of defense attorney Mark Agnefilo's mouth, it was clear they weren't going the traditional route. Instead of tiptoeing around the accusations, he went straight for the heart of the prosecution's case and called it out as a distortion. According to Agnefilo, the prosecution hadn't uncovered a secret criminal empire. They had taken Diddy's private relationships, wrapped them in sensational language, and labeled them as crimes. The defense made it clear: yes, Diddy lived an unconventional life. Yes, some of his relationships were outside the norm. But were they criminal? Absolutely not, they claimed. He framed the entire situation as a lifestyle choice, a consensual, swinger dynamic between adults, not a trafficking operation. The encounters that the prosecution labeled as exploitation were, in the defense's eyes, voluntary, mutual, and personal. There was no force, no coercion, and definitely no enterprise pulling the strings. The real issue, according to them, wasn't what Diddy did, but how prosecutors chose to spin it. It was about optics, not legality. But Agnefilo didn't stop there, because to him, this case wasn't just about consent. It was about the story being told and who was controlling the narrative. This, Agnefilo said, is a tale of two trials. On one side, you had the prosecution's version, a dark, sensational story of manipulation, control, and organized abuse. On the other, the defense presented what they called the reality, a world of fame and wealth, yes, but also of adult choices, complex relationships, and blurred boundaries. Agnefilo accused the government of building their case on emotion, not evidence. He argued that they took stories from ex-partners, disgruntled insiders, and online speculation and stitched them together to fit a predetermined narrative. One that made Diddy look like a predator, when in reality he claimed there was no hard proof of any criminal conspiracy. He pointed out that many of the witnesses brought forward didn't even know each other. There was no network, no organization, and no shared mission. Just scattered allegations and messy personal relationships. To the jury, the message was simple. You're not deciding between guilt and innocence, you're choosing between two completely different realities. One built on fear and outrage, and one grounded in facts. But it wasn't just the story that the defense challenged. It was the structure of the entire case. If the prosecution wanted to convince the jury that Diddy was running a criminal enterprise, they had to prove it wasn't just him acting alone. But the defense saw a huge flaw in that plan, and they went straight for it. Agnifilo made it clear. Racketeering is about organized crime. It requires a structure, a hierarchy, and a shared purpose between multiple people. But in this case, Diddy was the only one sitting in that courtroom. No co-defendants, no arrests of supposed co-conspirators, no insiders testifying that they were all in it together. The defense hammered that point. If this was truly a criminal enterprise, where were the rest of the players? Instead, the government was relying on witnesses who didn't claim to be part of any operation. They were former partners, former employees, and sometimes former friends. And even then, their stories didn't align. According to Agnifilo, the prosecution was trying to force puzzle pieces into a picture that didn't exist. The parties, the travel, the sex, it may have looked chaotic from the outside, but that doesn't make it racketeering. Not without real evidence, not without intent, and without that structure, the entire case starts to fall apart. But if you thought that was bold, wait until you hear how they tackled the most explosive part of the case, the sex trafficking allegations. This was the part of the trial that had everyone holding their breath. The prosecution had painted Diddy as someone who used his power to coerce women into situations they never truly agreed to. But the defense wasn't backing down. They went right into the heart of the most serious allegations involving Cassie Ventura and a woman known in court as Jane. According to Agnifilo, the prosecution made a dangerous leap, taking stories of consensual intimacy and labeling them as sex trafficking. He reminded the jury that both women had, at one point, been in ongoing relationships with Diddy. Relationships that included travel, gifts, and yes, sexual encounters. But were they forced? The defense said, absolutely not. He pointed to a crucial legal line, consent, and more importantly, the ability to withdraw it. But what the defense argued was that the prosecution had retroactively turned past relationships into criminal events based on bitterness or regret, not actual evidence of force, coercion, or exploitation. The defense's narrative was clear. Cassie and Jane made adult decisions. They may regret them now, but that doesn't make them victims of trafficking. That's not just legally questionable, it's dangerous. But Agnifilo didn't stop there, because the prosecution's entire case was built on more than just two women, and the defense had a few things to say about the rest of the witnesses too. By this point in the trial, the prosecution had introduced a range of names. People from Diddy's past who shared emotional, sometimes disturbing accounts. But the defense didn't just dispute the stories, they went after the credibility of the storytellers. Take Capricorn Clark. According to the defense, her testimony raised more questions than answers. Agnifilo argued that her timeline didn't add up, her claims lacked outside verification, and her motivation? Highly questionable. Then came Kid Cudi, a surprising inclusion in a case centered on sex trafficking. The prosecution hinted at violence and intimidation, referencing a mysterious car explosion. But again, the defense pushed back. There was no direct link between Diddy and the incident, no smoking gun, and no proof that the event was anything more than a tragic coincidence or street rumor. Agnifilo made a bold claim. These were grievances, not evidence. Fallout from failed friendships, failed partnerships, or personal drama, not proof of criminal conduct. And by lumping them into the case, the prosecution was, in the defense's view, muddying the waters. The jury was urged to question everything, not just what was said, but why it was said. And that doubt, the defense hoped, would be enough to break the prosecution's chain of accusations. But there was still one charge hanging over everything, the allegation that Diddy crossed state lines with escorts for sex, and what the defense said about that took everyone by surprise. One of the most explosive claims in the prosecution's case was that Diddy transported women across state lines to engage in prostitution. It's a serious charge, one that could seal a conviction if proven. But the defense pushed back hard, arguing the foundation of this allegation was shaky at best. Agnifilo made a striking point. The women at the center of these claims testified that they were not prostitutes. They insisted their relationships with Diddy were personal, not transactional. This was no underground trafficking ring. It was a network of friends, acquaintances, and partners navigating complicated lives in the spotlight. The defense argued that the prosecution had twisted those testimonies, taking words out of context and framing them to fit a criminal narrative. In their view, transporting someone isn't a crime unless the purpose is illegal. And if the women themselves denied being involved in sex work, how could that charge stand? This argument cast a shadow over the prosecution's case, forcing jurors to question the very evidence used to paint Diddy as a trafficker. But of course, the prosecution wasn't going down without one final push. With the defense laying out their bold claims, the prosecution knew the stakes were high, and Maureen Comey stepped up to deliver a powerful closing rebuttal. She told the jury not to get distracted by the defense's narrative tricks or emotional appeals. According to Comey, the facts told a different story, a story of a criminal enterprise built on manipulation and control. She reminded the jury that the law doesn't require multiple acts to convict. Even one proven instance of trafficking or conspiracy would be enough for a guilty verdict. The prosecution leaned heavily on the credibility of their witnesses, those who came forward despite personal risks, shining a light on what they claimed was a pattern of exploitation. Comey argued that the defense's attempts to paint these relationships as consensual lifestyle choices were a deliberate smokescreen, meant to confuse the jury and obscure the truth. As the courtroom tension peaked, the battle lines were clear, two radically different versions of reality, with the jury holding the ultimate power. Now, all eyes turned to the jury's deliberation and the verdict that could change everything. This trial wasn't just about Sean "Diddy" Combs. It was a clash of narratives, a legal battle that forced everyone to ask tough questions about consent, power, and where private life ends and criminal behavior begins. The defense painted a picture of personal choice and freedom, challenging the prosecution's claims at every turn. The prosecution stood firm, insisting the evidence revealed a darker truth of exploitation and crime. In the end, the jury holds the key. Their decision will shape not only Diddy's future, but also how similar cases are viewed for years to come. One thing is certain, this story is far from over. The questions raised here will linger long after the courtroom doors close. What do you think? Was this a case of misunderstood relationships or something more?